Well, good afternoon to everybody who's made it today. 13 months ago, in November of 2024, Washingtonians affirmed their commitment to economic justice. In legislative district after legislative district, in statewide seats for treasurer, insurance commissioner, attorney general, and governor, Democrats were elected across the state because the policies that they put forward for an economy that works for everybody were compelling. At that time, voters in the 43rd Legislative District sent me to Olympia as the first open socialist to serve in the Washington State Legislature in over a century. But more popular than any elected official in the state of Washington were the results of Washington State's capital gains tax referendum, where 2 out of 3 voting Washingtonians elected to continue taxing the ultra-wealthy to fund early learning and childcare in Washington State. Last year, Washingtonians went forward to fund vital services. Washington, D.C. went a different way. Project 2025 promised record tax breaks for huge corporations, rollbacks of social safety net programs like Medicaid and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and the elimination of aid following climate disasters like wildfires. President Trump swiftly went about actualizing that agenda. Simultaneously, a $16 billion budgetary shortfall impelled some elected officials in the building behind us to pursue deep public sector cuts earlier this year. Unfortunately, these were austerity measures that rhymed with the policies of Republicans in the other Washington in ways that should make us all jeer. After the state legislature slashed wildfire mitigation by $60 million, Border Patrol agents detained 2 Washington State firefighters this summer. In the time since the 2025 legislative session ended, the Trump administration has pursued a politics of division. Bogus panics over immigration and queer people scare Americans into believing that their adversaries are other members of the working class instead of the billionaires who got huge tax breaks by Trump's H.R. 1 budget. Washington state corporations T-Mobile, Amazon, and Microsoft took money that they saved from tax breaks enacted by the state legislature and used it to donate to Trump's gilded ballroom. The way for Washingtonians to fight back is to build a bolder Washington, a Washington that defends the people a Washington that defends the programs that people depend on, while the other Washington defunds them. That is why this week my legislative office is dropping a suite of 3 bills to meet this moment. The first is the Wildfire Alleviation Support Act. That's House Bill 2089, and this bill would restore funding to the wildfire response account that was cut in 2025. And this legislation accomplishes this by ending a tax break for big banks. The second bill will grant Washington counties the ability to raise corporate taxes of their own for the first time in our state's history. For too long, our counties have depended on regressive sales and property taxes, counting on increasingly unreliable federal grants to fund basic services like public safety and climate infrastructure is no longer an option. The third of these bills is the bill that we are gathered to discuss today. That is the Well Washington Fund. This is a new dedicated account. It will be guided by subject matter experts who will study the impact of federal austerity budgeting, and they will advise the state legislature on key investments that it must make to keep Washington healthy, whole, and well in the face of federal divestment by Washington, D.C. The Well Washington Fund funds our future. It will generate $3 billion annually to support public programs. The Washington State Office of Financial Management has identified cash assistance programs, higher education, and healthcare as the areas most endangered by Trump's H.R. 1 budget. Housing is additionally at risk due to deep cuts to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The Well Washington Fund protects these programs at a time of great financial uncertainty for the people of our state. Now, the revenue source at the heart of the Well Washington Fund is a corporate payroll tax on annual wages above a $125,000 threshold. Only the largest 1% of Washington corporations will pay this payroll tax, but we are prepared for a fight to get it passed nonetheless. Washington State has recently made historic investments in the public sector. With the power of progressive revenue, college and childcare have become more affordable for thousands of Washingtonians since 2020. And at every step of the way, we've heard the same arguments from the same big business mouthpieces. What will happen if big corporations leave, as if it does not matter that working Washingtonians will be displaced or will experience a worsened quality of life if we do not tax these corporations. Understand that there may be no kings in Washington state, but we most certainly do have elites. The 6 largest corporations in Washington state spent $2.1 million lobbying the state legislature earlier this year. And I think I speak for many within my district and outside of it in saying if these corporations were as enthusiastic about paying their taxes as they were about paying to avoid them, there are millions of Washingtonians who would not have to worry about how to pay for higher education, for healthcare, and housing in our state. Since 2013, high-earning Americans have paid the additional Medicare tax on their federal tax returns. And unlike the standard Medicare tax, this surtax is not matched by their employer. So the Well Washington Fund asks corporations to join in with their employees in contributing to the social safety net. And just as the federal additional Medicare tax helps to fund vital health services across our country, the Well Washington Fund will support those in poverty, the aged, and students in Washington state. And we are gathered here today to urge a hearing for the Well Washington Fund in the House Finance Committee in 2026. We urge its passage out of both chambers of the legislature. Let us protect the people of our state before the worst of the Trump austerity budget kicks into effect in 2027. At this time, it's going to be my honor to introduce Michelle Thomas from the Low Income Housing Alliance, who's going to share a few words with us about the impact that recent cuts to housing and urban development are going to have on housing and housing services in Washington state.
First of all, thank you so much, Representative Scott, for your leadership on this important issue. So I'm Michelle Thomas with the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. We're a statewide organization working to prevent and end homelessness and expand opportunities for affordable housing across the state. I'm here today because progressive revenue is necessary in order to protect the many, many people across the state struggling to keep a roof over their heads. Without significant progressive tax reform, our communities will continue to suffer and homelessness will grow. The Trump administration is proposing cruel changes to the federal homelessness policies that threatens a significant loss of housing for people in our state. Without state action, over 5,000 people who are currently safely housed may lose their housing next year. But even more is at risk. Washington renters are facing statewide eviction crisis with the highest levels in evictions across the state ever seen before. And our state Right to Counsel program that helps ensure that people have a fair process when they meet their landlords in court is struggling to keep pace. If the state refuses to invest $3 million more in this next legislative session, more people will be forced out of their homes due to unfair evictions. We have no choice but to ask the state to step up to fill the gaps created by these federal policy decisions and by the growing economic inequality in our state. And again, we know the only way the state can do this is by passing significant progressive revenue and by making our tax system more fair. Thank you.
We're going to have the chance now to hear from Christina from the Statewide Poverty Action Network. But not before I give her the microphone.
Hi, my name is Christina Savitsky, and I am a home...
I got you. Want to hold it for you?
Yeah.
No, it's okay. Hi, my name's Christina Savitsky. I'm a homeless disabled veteran and I stay with my 2 disabled adult sons. The cuts that have been proposed for programs like Medicaid and food stamps and for housing directly will impact my family. For instance, for food stamps and for Medicaid, the new work requirements are going to be very difficult when we already have problems with our voc rehab system and we're required to either get a job, which right now my son with autism has been trying for 3 years on his own. He is on a wait list at DVR services. There's nobody to help him get employed. So how will we be able to get him employed? And he wants to work. He actually really does want to work. And then for myself, with my disabilities, who and where am I going to go to be determined to be disabled for these programs? Where are the forms? Who's going to fill out the forms? What are the requirements? What are the definitions of disability? On top of all the labor that I will have to do for my family to recertify every 3 months, which I can't even do myself. I have to rely on case managers who already have me on a caseload of 150 plus per case manager at some of the programs I'm in. So right now, progressive revenue is greatly needed to help individuals like myself who are disabled to be able to get the services we need. And for things like, I need to get back with Voc Rehab to finish my one class, to finish my master's degree at UW, so that I can look for employment, which is also something I want to do as a disabled veteran. So we need progressive revenue in this state to overcome what is happening at the federal level to help individuals like myself.
Thank you very much, Christina. We're going to hear now from the American Association of University Professors. Are Abraham and Nora here? Excellent.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abraham Flaxman, and I'm a professor of global health and the vice president of our chapter of the American Association of University Professors at the University of Washington. Today, I'm speaking in my personal capacity. I am so excited to be here today. I love Washington State, and I love the University of Washington, and I'm desperate for bold leadership like this. We need to Trump-proof Washington. I'm going to tell you about the challenges we're already living through at the UW under this MAGA regime. First, like I said, I'm very happy to be here today, but let me tell you why I can be here. I'm usually busy teaching in the fall. I teach a pretty hard graduate course in the epidemiology department, Epi 554, or Introduction to Epidemic Modeling of Infectious Diseases. It's actually been quite popular in the last few years. But this year, the Epi department couldn't afford to offer all the classes they wanted, and they had to make tough choices. So no one gets to learn infectious disease modeling this year. I'm hoping to catch our students up next year. Teaching is 1/3 of our mission at the University of Washington. We're also dedicated to research and to patient care. And just like teaching, under Trump, everything else we do is at risk now too. My own research is on computer simulation and data science, and I'm going to tell you how I lost almost $1 million in federal funding for this work. Since 2022, my team has been developing data and software for probabilistic record linkage. You don't need to know what that is, but in short, record linkage is when someone gives us 2 data sets, and we stick them together so that we can answer questions that neither data set could have provided on its own. I should mention that the Washington State DSHS has been at the forefront of doing this in their RDA group since the 1990s. My team had a cooperative agreement with the US Census Bureau to build them tools for doing this with census-sized data sets. And over the last year, things have been pretty turbulent at the Census Bureau, and my partners there had to wind down our collaboration a year early. They were very gracious about it, and they said we were doing a great job, but they just no longer had the time to cooperate in our cooperative agreement. But even with this loss, we were lucky. My team had enough other projects that we did not have to make any layoffs, we did not have to make any furloughs, but we can't count on luck. And that takes me to my biggest concern, patient care. If you look at it a certain way, the UW is a giant hospital with some teaching and research on the side. And our Office of Finance, Planning, and Budgeting says that the federal changes to Medicaid that were legislated in H.R. 1 are too uncertain for them to put a dollar value on, but they could mean a 9-digit hole in our budget. I've worked with data science projects with Heart Review emergency docs for years now, and I know that our doctors will still be saving lives with or without Medicaid. But when it comes to keeping the lights on in the hospitals, the changes to Medicaid and to the disproportionate share hospital payments that pay for life-saving care for people without Medicaid or other insurance, these changes are putting our hospitals and our patients at risk. So thank you again for your leadership and for this bold planning and preparation to weather the storm. Please do everything in your power to keep University of Washington healing, inventing, and educating.
Thank you, Abby. I'm Amy Hagopian. I'm a professor emeritus at the University of Washington School of Public Health, and I serve on the board of the AAUP with Abby. I'm the elected secretary. Our AAUP chapter, by the way, is more than 100 years old at the university. So our chapter enthusiastically endorses the Well Washington Fund that Representative Scott proposes. And I'm speaking here for a faculty member who couldn't be here, Nora Kenworthy. She teaches at the University of Bothell, where she trains nurses and other public health professionals. But she is teaching at this moment and could not be here. So her health sciences students represent a remarkable diversity of communities in our state, with a vast majority of students coming from ethnically, racially, or economically marginalized backgrounds. UW-Bothel's programs work to ensure health professionals who serve the diverse communities in our state both represent and understand these communities. 90% of our alumni stay to work in the state of Washington, which is an important way to fill our crucial public health workforce gaps. And we're anticipating the largest nursing shortage in our state's history. The federal assault on academic health professionals training is threatening our programs from all sides. Cuts to the federal grants undermine our research as well as our ability to support and grow workforce training programs. My colleague's school at UW-Bothell, for example, lost renewal of its federal grant that supports the diversification of the nursing workforce through scholarships and academic support. Apparently that was too woke for them. Other federal policies make it difficult to recruit and retain students. A recent Department of Education ruling eliminated both nursing and public health student loans and eligibility for public service loan forgiveness programs. And assaults on Medicaid and Medicare funding further imperil UW Medicine and the many health centers and institutions that support our state's healthcare system. So without additional revenue, such as what Representative Scott proposes, it's hard to know how programs like UW-Bothel's Health Sciences will survive. And over the past few years, our health programs have lost nearly half their faculty at the same time the university had to impose a hiring freeze to make up for other federal cuts to the university. We can't rely on tuition revenue, which is just a very small part of the revenue stream to UW. We need enough health professionals to meet our state's needs and to continue serving our communities in ways that uplift health equity, partnership, and cultural humility. Thank you to Representative Scott for the bravery, courage, and stamina to promote this legislation, and we encourage his colleagues to support it. Thank you.
Next up, we're going to hear from Fatima Bakswala from Tech for Taxes and Balance Our Tax Code.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Fatima Bakswala, and I am the leader of Tech for Taxes, a coalition of tech workers in Washington state who advocate for progressive revenue. I moved to Seattle in 2019 to work as an engineer at Meta. And for the past 6 years, as I've continued to work in big tech, there is one lesson that I have learned over and over again. These tech mega corporations and their billionaire leaders care about exactly one thing, and that is amassing an absolutely immoral amount of personal wealth. And in Washington state, we make that goal incredibly easy to accomplish. While thousands of Washingtonians lined up for food assistance this past year, the CEO of Starbucks received a salary of nearly $100 million. Lawmakers line up our critical social services like lambs to the slaughter to balance our budget, while Microsoft's yearly profit could cover our state's annual operating budget 3 times over. For decades, these corporations have taken advantage of our state's regressive tax code. They've spent millions of dollars lobbying against any changes that would hurt their bottom line. It's well past time for our state government to force these profit giants to contribute back to the social systems that all of us, including these companies, benefit from. The Well Washington Fund is a critical first step in getting these corporations to pay what they truly owe into our tax system. With looming federal cuts used to pay for federal tax breaks for billions and millionaires, I want to say that the stakes have never been higher. But in reality, the stakes have always been incredibly high. The cost of not taxing these mega corporations fairly has always been the lives and well-being of working Washingtonians. I am sick and tired of balancing our state's budget on the backs of our lowest income residents while some of the world's wealthiest people and corporations live in our state and benefit from our social systems.
That's right.
We needed legislation like the Well Washington Fund years ago, and we need it right now. I am so grateful to Representative Scott and our allies in the legislature for fighting for progressive revenue this session, and I look forward to the fight that's going to come up around this tax in the coming months.
All right, lastly, we are going to hear from Mike Yastrzemski from the Washington Federation of State Employees, and then I want to say after that we're going to be doing a question and answer for members of the media that might have questions about what I've presented today and some of the things that we've heard.
Hello, brothers, sisters, siblings. My name is Mike Yastrzemski. As said, I am the president of the Washington Federation of State Employees, representing over 50,000 Washingtonians who do the work that keeps our state running. Again, thank you to Representative Scott for putting the spotlight on this issue, for standing or sitting with us last legislative session when furloughs and healthcare cuts were on the table. And I want to do a quick shout out to one of our members, Manusis Jacobson, who has also been tirelessly working on this effort. So our message is pretty simple. Everyone in Washington should have access to and benefit from public services, and everyone should help maintain them. But that's not how we do things here in Washington. We have the second most regressive tax code in America. So let me translate that. The richer you are, the smaller your tax rate. The poorer you are, the bigger your tax rate. I mean, seriously, you couldn't design something more backwards if Crisscross wrote it. Public workers are burned out. Agencies are understaffed. Healthcare systems are stretched beyond breaking. And this impacts everyone, everyone's safety, everyone's quality of life. For example, the Department of Corrections is down 200 positions, and there is a backlog of over 13,000 active warrants that can't be served. Our members at the Department of Transportation are working skeleton crews trying to just maintain our highways. It's unsafe for them, and it's unsafe for every single person who travels on Washington roadways. There's a $1 billion backlog, maintenance backlog, in our beautiful state parks. These are your parks for you and future generations to enjoy. You're paying for them, but guess what? The super rich are not. Working families are drowning while the wealthiest can't even spill a single drop of their champagne. Well, guess what? That ends with us. That ends with the Well Washington Fund. When you take a look around and you see folks lining up, that is what power looks like. That is what solidarity sounds like. And this, every single one of us together, is how we will build a Washington for all, not just the ultra rich. We're done whispering, we're done asking politely, and we're done pretending the wealthiest people in this state don't need to pay their fair share. Today is the day we say, loud enough for everyone to hear, we are not here to be quiet. We are here to win. So I want to ask you, let's warm up. Who makes this state run? We do. Who keeps it running when everything else falls apart? We do. And who's tired of a tax code that treats us, working people, like an ATM? We are. And every time we bring this up, what do we hear? Oh man, we can't tax the rich. They might have to downgrade their luxury lot to a slightly smaller luxury yacht, you know? Yeah, tots in Paris to their maritime struggles. Maybe they should cut back on their avocado toast budget, you know, stretch their budget further. But we want a fair tax code. What do we want?
Fair tax code.
And when do we want it?
Now!
And who is going to fight for it?
We are!
That's right. The Well-Washington Fund, pretty simple. Let's close the loopholes. Let's make the ultra-wealthy pay what the rest of us are already paying. Invest in public services that actually supports the people. Build the kind of state that we deserve. Not one for the richest 1% that they can buy off the discount shelf. But again, because we are building a Washington for all people, not just the rich. Let's turn the heat up a little bit more. Every time someone says, well, we can't afford tax reform, what they really mean is, we can't afford to inconvenience billionaires and giant corporations. Heaven forbid we ask the richest among us to contribute like the rest of us do every single day. But you know what we can't afford? Caseworkers drowning in impossible caseloads, public workers who can't even afford housing, mental health systems that are one crisis away from a collapse, communities denied the services they depend on because the wealthiest hoard their share like smog. This is real life for most of us. I have friends who have ended up in the hospital because they have to ration life-saving medications. I've had coworkers, people who work 40+ hours a week serving some of the most medically complex cases in this state, living in their cars because they can't afford housing. I've met Dean's List students who can't finish their degrees because of the costs. That is what it truly costs us. That is what holds us back. And that is what we are here today to fix. So let me ask you, who deserves better?
We do!
And who's fighting for better?
We are!
And who's building a Washington for all?
We are!
This is our moment. This is our fight. This is our time to stand shoulder to shoulder and say, you will not balance the budget on our backs anymore. You will not starve our public services anymore. And you will not silence working people anymore. Because we are organized, we are united, and we are coming in hot. Brothers, sisters, siblings, let's hit these phones. Let's hit the doors. Let's hit the Capitol steps loud enough to shake those windows. Because we've got the power, we've got the people, and we've got the fire. So solidarity forever. Let's go build a Washington for all, and let's go win this fight.
Right.
Thank you.
Around whether or not the bill is significant enough to attach an emergency clause to it, I think that the urgency of some of the folks who have spoken today speaks eloquently to the question that you've asked, and that is something that we would definitely want to explore. The issue with Trump's H.R. 1 budget and the impact that is going to have on so many institutions in our state is going to probably take effect. I mean, many of them have already taken effect, those austerity measures. The worst of it, we know from things that the Office of Financial Management has said, indicate that 2027 and 2028 is going to be a period of a particular duress for people that depend on these services. So an emergency clause to make sure that we're mitigating the impacts that have already taken effect and to offset ones that we know are shortly going to be coming is something that we will definitely be exploring.
So you don't think the people of the state of Washington should have a say in whether or not this tax is implemented?
Well, the people of the state of Washington, we have some of the highest rates of voter turnout in the country, have elected dutifully representatives to come to Olympia to execute what we in our expertise see as the will of the people. So we have, in essence, a public referendum on our leadership and the direction it should go in every couple of years. And so when the legislature makes a decision, that is a decision that I think many of the people of the state of Washington can know has been made with some of their impact. I mean, if you know anything about the legislative process, you understand that we're going to be hearing from all kinds of people who are on many sides of this issue. But I will say the most recent poll, if you will, that we have received on this question is the capital gains tax referendum that took place in November of 2024. 2 out of 3 voting Washingtonians elected to continue taxing the rich. That's a pretty loud statement, and I think that we'll have the public on our side, just as we have the public on our side today in fighting for protecting silos of public sector spending that are under attack from the Trump administration.
Representative Scott, you
Right here.
talked a little bit about President Trump, needing this money because of steps that he's taken.
Mm-hmm.
But Democrats this time last year, proposed the same kind of tax.
before President Trump was sworn in. So how can you blame the situation we're in on President Trump when Democrats believe it existed before he came back in and before the big beautiful bill was signed into law?
Right. So the question is around the timing of this particular bill. There was a similar bill that was introduced in the state legislative session this year. Senator Rebecca Saldana, who will be co-sponsoring this bill in the other chamber in the Senate, introduced Senate Bill 5796 because at that time the state of Washington was facing a 16 billion, B as in Bill Gates, budgetary shortfall. Now, part of the reason why that budgetary shortfall existed was because Washington, through last year, had a tax code that was more regressive than almost any other state in the union. So I will grant you that when we're talking about opposing Trump, we don't often enough talk about the fact that we are also opposing Trumpism. And you can have major corporations who are seated in Washington or in Washington, D.C., getting tax breaks from here or from the other Washington. What we are talking about is the fact that we right now have a crisis in the making in three very critical silos of public sector spending. We can have all kinds of debates about how it is that we got here. This is a proposal that we are putting forward because I believe, and some of about 150 of my closest friends also believe, that this is going to be a solution that we can bring forward. And so we can have all kinds of debates about the timing of it, how we got here, but this is a solution that we believe is going to make people's lives in our state better.
To that end, just on the solution aspect of it, I mean, we don't really have to guess what the negative impacts of a tax like this can be. When Seattle was thinking about taxing high-paying jobs, and it was a tax on high-paying jobs. I did an interview with another socialist, Shaun Scott, and I said, will you own it if Amazon moves jobs out of the city? And she kind of was trying to call their bluff. The first thing they did is move 10,000 jobs to Bellevue.
Right.
So, and now Bruce Vail came out and said, the amount of money we're getting from the Jumpstart tax has diminished because businesses are leaving rather than pay it. So do you understand that there is a likelihood that businesses could decide, Microsoft just said they would,
Sure,
to move jobs out of the state, and are you concerned about that?
Right. So we have a situation with many major corporations, in particular Amazon and Microsoft, which I think one of which you had mentioned, have already been shedding jobs. They didn't need tax policy to be an impetus to invest in artificial intelligence, and the goal of that technology is to divest from human labor. We have seen many times in the state legislature the threat of jobs being relocated hung over the head of state lawmakers, most famously perhaps in the example of Boeing, where they shook the state legislature down for the single largest corporate welfare package that was granted by a state government in the history of the republic, and then they moved the jobs anyway. I am much more concerned about working people who are going to be displaced, working people who might move from Washington because they can't afford childcare, because they can't afford the cost of medicine, because this is not a good place to try to start or raise a family or go to school. The perspective that you are speaking from, frankly, is very well represented in the state legislature by the major corporations that have spent millions over the years lobbying the state legislature, and they expect a return on investment. Those aren't the entities that I center in my policy making. I believe that they're spoken for enough in Olympia. Next question.
Are you optimistic about building a coalition to pass this bill when Republicans and Democrats alike have indicated that they're a little tax shy in 2026?
Well, Republicans comprise a tiny minority in state government for a reason. Nonetheless, the people within their districts, Franklin County, Benton County, others, you see very, very high rates of reliance on food stamps and cash assistance programs, such as the kind that the Well Washington Fund will support. So if GOP leadership continues to want to be out of step with where some of their actual voters might be, that's their problem. This is a fight for people across Washington state, understanding that we see actually higher density of rates of support for cash assistance programs and higher reliance on Medicaid, oftentimes in red GOP-led districts than we see in blue ones. And each life in Washington state is precious, so we're fighting for all of them. With respect to Democrats, I should like to believe that as a member of the House Democratic Caucus that progressive revenue is going to be a priority in this session. We do a lot of talking in the House Democratic Caucus about the terrible impact that the second Trump presidency has been having. And so we want to make sure that the voices of people who agree with that just are amplified, and that's what this press conference is about today.
Great.
Follow up?
Well, also in last session with Saldana's bill, it seemed like building coalition there was hard. Do you have a different strategy this time around?
What I would say is, and the senator did excellent work shepherding that bill, which got a great hearing in the Senate and the other chamber. What we didn't know earlier on this year was the full extent of the cuts that we would be seeing from the federal level. And now that we have that policymaking context, that awareness of what the particular silos of public sector spending that are in danger might be, my hope is that there's going to be an added sense of urgency from inside the state legislative building, because as you see today, there's quite a bit of urgency outside of it, and people wanting to see this institution do right by the people who elected officials here.
All right, thank you.
Have you had any conversations with House leadership at this point about whether they will support this bill? And likewise, any conversations with House Finance Committee leadership about whether they're here?
I have had a number of encouraging meetings that have let me know that revenue is something that has to be seriously considered. I see myself as much as an organizer as I do a lawmaker, and I believe that a core tenet of organizing is bringing to the table voices of people that are not necessarily present inside or who do not have their perspectives properly represented on the inside. So this is part of the legislative process, and we look forward to making sure that our viewpoint is made clear, that the urgency around this issue is felt appropriately by state lawmakers, whether they're in leadership or without.
You said something interesting a minute ago.
Would you like a follow-up?
I actually agree with you. Yes, please.
Okay.
You said that Washington is not a good place. I'm going to misquote you, to live, work, raise a family, or go to school. Whose fault is that?
Well, we can definitely have a very, very thorough conversation about.
It's not a good state to do all those things. Whose fault is that?
Sure. So we can have a great conversation about the shortcomings of elected officials who have maybe been here longer than I have. I was elected last November. I have done my best to put forward policies that are going to be good for people in our state. And I think it's part of the democratic process to criticize where criticism is due.
Are other folks who spoke willing to take any questions?
No. No, they're not. Any other
You
questions?
said before that you, before you open this up, you said that others who spoke would be willing to take questions.
I'll take questions on their behalf. If you have a question for somebody who spoke.
For Fatima, because you came to work, you said for Meta. Do you still work there? You don't?
Okay.
But
that's the extent of. If you have a question for me, that's perfectly fine.
So if companies like Meta, Microsoft, these big guys don't bring in workers for those more lucrative paying jobs because of your suggested tax,
Right.
they're only bringing in low wage jobs, and the other ones are out of the state, then the tax revenue you wish to create from this tax won't exist.
Can I ask a question about which outlet you report for?
The Center Square, I said that when I asked you the first question.
Thank you very much. And have you reported at all on AI in the last year or couple of years? Not so much? Okay, so when you...
Is that meant to be insulting?
No, it's directly relevant to the question that you're asking, because when I hear people talking about concerns around jobs being shed, which is a very...
Can you answer my questions?
I will answer it. I will answer it, absolutely. When I hear people voice concerns about jobs that might be shed, which is a very important question. There are many deindustrialized communities throughout Washington state that have been hit very hard by corporations that did decide to relocate because they didn't want to pay what they owed in taxes. But then I don't hear any concerns around the fact that many of these corporations are actively investing in technology that is designed to divest from human labor. That strikes me as incredibly disingenuous, because what it shows is that many corporations are doing the job shedding on their own volition. So if we're not applying the same scrutiny that we have to those business practices which are designed to divest from human labor, but we are talking about tax policy which is going to fund people that are here, people that are contributing to the tax base, people that want to be in Washington state, what that tells me is that that's actually more pro-corporate propaganda than it is an actual question. Next question.
I'm ready for you to answer my question.
Next question.
You did not...
I do have a general question about the budget. Well, actually, Carly, do you want to get your question answered?
I would appreciate you answering my question. I said, so if your tax is implemented,
right,
then these companies like Meta, Amazon, they're not going to want to locate the higher paying jobs here.
Right.
They'll locate them elsewhere, and they might still keep their lower wage earners here. Then your tax isn't going to create the wealth that you are saying it's going to create.
Right.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, there's a trade-off in all policymaking discussions. At present, the unfortunate reality is that we rely mostly on property and sales taxes in Washington state, which is to say those are people who are actively contributing to the tax base in Washington. So when we have very, very well-funded public programs, when we have well-funded higher education, when we have well-funded healthcare in Washington state, housing that's very affordable, that's going to attract a lot of people to come to Washington state. And by the by, when those investments have been made historically, that has been something that has benefited major corporations anyway. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, for every federal dollar that is spent in Washington state, it generates $1.50 of economic activity. So I do not center the perspective of big business in our policymaking. As I said before, that perspective is very well represented here in Olympia. At the same time, I do recognize that there is a corollary positive effect from policies such as these, because one thing that's good for business is when people have money to spend, when people have a roof over their heads, when people want to come to Washington state because of the services that we have here. So I'm more interested in protecting the services that people who are here actively and enthusiastically contributing to the tax base. And the corporations' perspective is very well represented here in Olympia, I think.
Just a basic follow-up.
Right here.
There seems to be this sort of insinuation that we don't have the money we need to pay for the basics. I think you articulated some of the basic things that people are lacking. Our state budget has ballooned 170%, accounting for inflation since 1991.
Right.
We just passed the largest tax increase in state history. Do we have a spending problem, a priority problem, or do we have a revenue problem?
Well, in the 2025 legislative session, Washington state also made $7 billion worth of cuts. Those were cuts to childcare, additional cuts to higher education, additional cuts to the pension plans of retired public employees. So the question that I would ask is, how many cuts is enough? Maybe we should be taking actually more out of public schools. That would be something that would really attract businesses to Washington state, wouldn't it be, if we had defunded public schools? If childcare was not available for people that wanted to come to Washington state to start a family, what would that do to the tax base? So I think that the train of thought that you're going down with the bent of questioning is a dangerous one, because it's a austerity vision for our state where $7 billion worth of cuts is not enough. And so what we're here today to talk about is the fact that revenue is the way that we solve many of the problems that are posed in front of us. And so that's what this is about today.
How can you call it austerity, though, when it's
Do we have, we've heard quite a lot from this person. I just want to make sure that we have others with the ability to ask questions as well. And then if we come back to you, if nobody else has anything, then we can go on. Okay.
Because you asked, how many cuts is enough? How many taxes is enough? I mean, is there a point of revenue where you'd be satisfied with the number of taxes, the amount of revenue we have?
Yeah, well, I think taxes...
But real people are impacted by these taxes. You know this.
That's right.
We saw a ton of taxes.
They are. So what I would say is that the taxing in and of itself is not the social good. The good is making sure that institutions that people rely on are well funded. So as long as we are still hearing from people talking about not being able to have affordable housing, people having a hard time getting a higher education, people who are going to be kicked off of the Medicaid rolls, people who are having a hard time accessing basic services, taxing as a matter of basic arithmetic is the way that we get to funding those programs. So as long as we have people that are willing to come down to Olympia in the middle of the day when it's not even the legislative session to say that we need basic services funded, that's my gauge for whether or not we have done enough on the revenue question in Washington state. This is the answer.
Yeah, but there seems to be if there's other reporters who are not asking any questions, there seems to be a general kind of laughter or disdain for job creators. And the truth is, that's proof of it. The truth is, there are a ton of businesses will be impacted. Several restaurants near Amazon just closed. So the result is Amazon's moving jobs out. There's this entire ecosystem of small businesses that relies on those jobs being there.
Right.
So this sort of disdain or scoffing for the contributions that some of those major corporations have made up and down our economy is sort of bewildering to people who understand it.
Sure. So the laughter that you hear has to do with the fact that many of the people who are represented here at this rally today are working people who are largely responsible for the profits that those companies have created. We see the policy outcomes of the corporations very, very well reflected. The policy imperatives of the people who helped to create that wealth by selling their labor to those corporations less well represented. And I think that sometimes laughter speaks for itself. There are a lot of people who I think are quite used to seeing big business mouthpieces of various kinds trumpet some of the same talking points. This is a space where we're trying to talk about what it looks like to invert how our politics look. What does it look like to actually put working people at the center of them, as opposed to big corporations that, as I said before, are quite spoken for in Olympia.
That's right.
Yeah.
So would you like them to...
There's a question right
here.
here.
Is there actually a fear that these businesses will suffer when they are the ones receiving these big tax breaks?
I would say that there are many major corporations that have benefited from enormous tax subsidies, such as the kind that the Washington Fund does not address. That is a question for many other kinds of legislation, including House Bill 2089, another bill that closes a loophole for large financial institutions. I would say that many of the largest corporations in our state, as a corollary impact of the policy that we're pursuing, are going to be impacted for sure, but probably impacted for the better when you have more people wanting to move to Washington State because of adequately funded social services, more people wanting to go to school here, people understanding that they can go to Washington if they are sick, if they need to get well, because we have a very accessible healthcare. I would question the value of a business endeavor that did not see the value of very well-funded public services.
Would you like them to leave, Representative Scott? Do you think that Amazon and Microsoft are a net good for our state?
Say more about that. When you say net good, what do you mean?
Do you think that they, very, very plainly what it says, do you think they contribute and add more value to our state than they detract?
I think that workers, were they to collectivize, could come up with something like Amazon on their own, but that Amazon has a very difficult time providing the value that you would like to see in reverse. In other words, I think that working people getting together, forming unions, coming out and lobbying for policies such as this, could create something that resembled an Amazon corporation without that added layer of exploitation. But I don't know that Amazon's leadership, such as it is, would be able to do something like that on its own. So I'm much more concerned with the social good of people that are in Washington State, that want to be here, that believe in Washington State enough to fight for well-funded public programs. And they can speak for themselves through other channels if they would like to.
When the billionaire class comes for this bill, and you can see that they have, what are you going to do to make sure that they lose?
A lot of this and more. For context, this is not even the state legislative session, which begins in about 5 or 6 weeks. This was a midday rally that was held more or less at the height when you could expect to have to brave rush hour traffic to come down. We got a lot of people to come down here to fight for this bill. And we have to believe that as we get closer to the state legislative session, as it becomes clearer and clearer what the impact of H.R. 1 is going to be, that those voices are going to be amplified even further. And the next time we're out here talking about fighting for this bill, the crowd is going to be even bigger. It's about movement building. For me, as somebody who was elected in a sense as an organizer, you're trying to add voices to the table and to the discussion that are not presently represented. And I think that this is a great show of what's possible when everyday people, when people who are part of unions, people who, make our public institutions run, get involved in our public discussion. It tilts the table and it makes victory that much more likely.
Okay, thank you.
When you have conversations with, or have you had any conversations with these businesses, and are they at all, we were talking earlier about the disdain that some people heard from the laughter. Do you feel like they're acting with disdain towards working people, and do you feel like there's a world where they could be at the table telling us how we could tax them in an effective way to create a safer budget? Is there any good faith conversations with them?
So I will say that one of the most encouraging conversations that I had in the last legislative session was with a credit union lobbyist who wanted to discuss what some of the revenue options on the table were. They let me know about an exemption that existed in what was called the first mortgage interest deduction, where there are a lot of non-community banks that are nonetheless making use of tax exemptions that are meant for community banks. So House Bill 2089, which is a bill that funds the wildfire mitigation account, actually was born out of that discussion with a credit union lobbyist who said, we want to be part of this discussion. We don't necessarily think we're going to be hit by this tax, but we want to be part of the solution to a problem, which is the problem of austerity. So when you see House Bill 2089, which is a bill that provides a stable source of funding for the wildfire mitigation account, that was a conversation that came out of a constructive discussion, or that was a legislation that came out of a productive discussion with a credit union lobbyist. I can't say that I have found other lobbyists who represent much larger corporations than credit unions to be particularly forthcoming on some of these issues, but it's always it's better late than never. So maybe 2026 is the year that Amazon and Microsoft comes forward and says that we believe in progressive revenue as much as the Democratic Socialists of America do. Okay.
There was a bill introduced that would add a tax to a bill last year that taxes temporary workers that already exist, but they want to add paid protesters. So if you hire paid protesters, it would tax them as temporary workers. Do you support that?
I don't know any paid protesters, so it's going to be a difficult bill to take seriously. All right, thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Shaun, we're